Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Go is the perfect programming language for making CLIs. From its low-level nature to its super simple design, when it comes to CLIs, Go just works. In fact, a lot of the tools that you use in day-to-day basis are actually built in Go. Think Docker, Hugo, Kubernetes, and much more. Today, I'm going to show you how to build a super simple CLI application that is going to accept some input from the user, save that input into a SQLite database, and be able to list all the entities that are listed in the database in a very cute little table. Of course, this is a very simple project, but I will show you how to get started and get more comfortable with the tools to build the CLI in Go. Today, the tools that we're going to use is mainly Cobra CLI. Cobra CLI is the most widely used framework for building CLIs in Go. In fact, it actually powers those previously mentioned powerhouses of development, Docker, Kubernetes, and so on. Along with Cobra CLI, we will also use Pterm. Pterm is a bunch of components and utilities that allow us to accept input from user very easily, also allow us to display information in different ways that looks really good, renders very consistently across different OSs, different terminals, and so on. Before we get started, if you are finding this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you are keen to get your hands on the full code that we are going to go through, you can do that by going into the blog post which is linked in the description below. Let's do it. Alright, firstly, we actually need to install Cobra CLI. To do that, I'm going to run this command, which is go install this GitHub package, which is basically the Cobra CLI. I'm going to leave all of this in the description below, and also you can find it in the blog post. So after running this command, I will have Cobra CLI, Cobra-CLI as an executable on my machine. Now, we can't just use this in the void like that. We have to make a Go project first. So let's do that. I'm going to make a folder called Go CLI Basics, and then I'm going to go into this folder, and then I'll run Go mod init, and I'm going to call this module CLI Basics under my GitHub handle. Nice. Now next, we need to initialize Cobra CLI. To do this, I will simply run Cobra CLI init. Now, what will happen here is that Cobra CLI is going to basically scaffold a very simple CLI project for us. So let's have a look. After running this, if I run a tree command to see what's happening in my folder, I can see that there is a file called root, and then there is a module that is called cmd. The module cmd, here represented by the folder cmd, is basically all the commands that you have in your CLI. All right, let's have a look at what's actually inside of the root.go file. So if I go into the root.go file, I will see that this is basically the root command here, which is basically a command coming from Cobra. I can see here the use property called CLI basics, and that is basically the name of my eventual CLI when I ship it to user. That's basically the name that the customer is going to type in their command line interface to basically just run my CLI. So that would be your Docker name or whatever it might be. In this case, obviously, it's a very silly name, CLI basics, but that will work for now. You can also find something called short and long description. Both these are help descriptions. They describe what the CLI is all about. So if you remember, if you've ever tried to run Docker on its own like that, you will see this kind of like help commands coming up along with the description of what Docker does. And that's where this is coming from the short description and the long description down here. In fact, if I were to run go run main go itself right now, what I will see is basically this help behavior showing up in my command line. And that's the default behavior of the root command in general. If you run the root command of whatever CLI, you should either see a description of that CLI or some help going along with it. Now, if I scroll down a little bit here, I will see this property called run. In this property, we basically run the function that is running whenever that command is being triggered. Now that we are in the root command, Like I mentioned, it's customary or normal for the root command not to do anything. It basically displays the help associated with the CLI. But just for for the sake of demoing what happens in here, let's actually do that. Let's actually add some code inside of this function to show how it works. So what I'm going to do is just basically add a print line here called root cold here, for example. And if I were to run this again, I will see that instead of getting this help messages and the description from before, I get root cold, basically meaning that this function here has been triggered. Nice. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. You will see this function called execute, and this is the function that actually basically just executes your CLI. So we don't have to touch that. It's all good. Finally, you will see this init function. Init function is a very interesting function, and this is where you kind of like init all your configs for your CLI and also your persistent flags. We are not going to talk about configs and persistent flags because they are a bit of an advanced topic we are not going to cover in this video today. However, I want to show you how you can work with flags, the normal flags, the not non-persistent normal flags, and how you can get their value inside of your running function. You can see here, by default, I have this flag called toggle, and the toggle flag here is a Boolean. Now, knowing that my root command can accept this flag, how can I get access to that flag value inside my root command? The way you do that is basically as such. So I'm going to say that I'm expecting a value called toggle and an error. And then from that command variable, basically, I am going to have a look at flags as such, and then get bool. And I know the name of my flag that I'm trying to get to is called toggle with a double G, not a triple G. Nice. And that will give me the value of toggle. And then what I can do is I will say just if toggle is true, then I'm going to print an extra print. For example, I'm going to print toggle is true. Let me just clean this part up and we're good to go. Now, if I were to go back to my command line here, if I were to run this without giving it the toggle flag, I get this normal behavior, which is basically the root code, what we've done before. If I were to run this again with dash dash toggle flag here, I will see that toggle now has a value of true, and that's why this couple of lines here get executed. And that's basically just how you can work with flags inside of your run command. Nice. So far, we've learned how to basically run a function on whatever command that we have in our CLI. We also learned briefly about toggles, or basically in this case, flags, how you can get their value inside of your running function, and how you can work with the value that you get supplied from your flags. Let's keep going. Now, as I mentioned before, usually it's customary that when you run the root command of your CLI, nothing happens but displaying the description of the CLI and also basically just the help associated with it. Usually, you would have to add more new commands for you to be able to kind of like do anything with your CLI. Think saying docker tag or docker compose or whatever it is. Tag, compose, run, build. These are all commands inside of the Docker CLI. In the same fashion for us now, we need to be able to add commands, and that is very simple to do with Cobra CLI. Now, I want to explain to you some kind of like how the hierarchy of commands works in the CLI. To do this, we're just gonna add a new command, and we'll call that parent. Very simple to do with Cobra CLI. You just simply run Cobra CLI add parent. Cool. Now let's have a look at what that did for us. It basically added this parent.go file underneath the command module. So let's open up this file and have a look at it. Now, again, it's very simple. This is the name of the command under use. In this case, it's parent, and a couple of descriptions as well. So we have the short description and we have the long description here as well. We also have the run function, which is what we had before, and this is what gets run whenever I call this command. So if I were to go here and go, if I run main.go, and then I run the parent command, I will just see that this function gets executed. Great. Now, this command also accepts flags, and I can do the same exact thing that we did earlier with the toggle flag to show you that it works across the whole stack. So I can do this here as well. I can say that I want to get the toggle flag. It's going to be cmd.flags, cmd.flags.get boolean value, which is called toggle. And again, if toggle is true, then we're just going to print line of toggle is true. So if I were to run this again with a dash t, I can see that toggle here is being printed. Notice how I use dash t right away. And this is actually the shorthand of that flag, which is specified here in the specific part of the flag command right there. Nice. So we learned how to add a command and also how to run that command. And you're already kind of like familiar with how to deal with flags and how to consume them into your run function. The other concept I want to introduce to you is basically subcommands. Subcommands are commands of commands. So imagine you have this docker compose up. In this case, docker is the name of the CLI, compose is basically the name of the command, and up is the name of the subcommand. And that's the hierarchy I was talking about earlier. So let's add a subcommand here. We're going to call that child and then see how things are working. To do this, all I have to do is again run the Cobra CLI add command, but in this case, I'm going to pass a flag called p, and then the p here is going to be parent command. There's something else I want to tell you about as well. If you look at this init of the parent command, you can see that we are adding the parent command here to the root command. Now, when I run this basic command, which is basically saying I want to add a child command under the parent of parent command, what this will do is create a file for me called child.go. Let's have a look at this file. And again, it's the basic stuff. But if you look closely here, you will see that we are adding the child command here to the parent command and not to the root command. Just to show you what I mean by this, if we were to have a look at the parent command, you will see it's being added to root. Meanwhile, the child command is being added to the parent. And that is the difference between, that's the kind of like the code that creates this hierarchy where you have the root and then you add things to it. And then those things that you add, in this case, the parent command, you can also add a subcommand of that in the same way. Now, subcommands work exactly the same way, but they get called a little bit differently. So imagine, like I mentioned earlier, Docker compose up. In this case, we are going to run go main, the go, which is basically will be standing for the name of your application, and then parent, and then we call child of that parent, and you can see here that child is called, and this is basically coming from here. Child is called. Nice. So that's basically how you were to add a command, add a subcommand, and then how to run the command and the subcommand separately. Now you understand the basics of the creating a CLI in Go. You know how to create a CLI, you know what the root does, and you know how to add a command on top of that, and also have to add subcommands. You have a little bit of understanding of how to work with flags. Let's move on to create our super simple CLI. First step is to actually be able to accept input from the user. Let's do that. To be able to do that, I actually need to install Pterm, as I mentioned earlier. So I will do that by go get and then GitHub. I will find a Pterm in my history because Pterm, right? And that will install Pterm in my current folder. Cool. The other thing I also want to do is do a little bit of cleanup. We don't really need these files anymore. This was just for demonstration purposes. So I will delete them. So I'm going to run a cleanup on the parent and also on the child. And that means I'm just cleaning things up as I go so things don't get a little bit too much. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Pterm. There are many component libraries for making CLIs in Go. From my experience, a lot of these libraries are using some special characters that don't get rendered the same way across different OSs or across different terminals. Pterm is fantastic when it comes to this. Not only the code that you write for accepting some kind of like input from the user or displaying a table is really succinct and simple compared to other alternatives, but it also works very well across different OSs and across different terminals. And that's why Pterm is my choice for today. Now that we have installed pterm, I'm going to add a command to basically accept an input from the user. Now, to do this, I'm going to again run the cobra-cli command here with the add command, and I'm simply going to add a command called add. This is a little bit like a little bit confusing, but it should be straightforward. Basically, what I did here is make this file called add under the command modules right there. Now, again, let's open up this file called add. And again, by this point, you already know what's happening here. It's basically just a very simple, kind of like empty command right there. Cool. Let's actually do some work right now. So all I will do, now that we have installed pterm, I'm going to say that I need some sort of a text input. To do that, I will use the default interactive text input from pterm. I'm going to save this into a variable called text input. Cool. And then what I will do is I'm going to say text input here, right there, and then we show that. And then this method show is going to return the result and an error in case we are not able to get the result or the input from the user. Finally, what I will do, just to show you what's happening here, is I'm going to print this result, whatever we get from the user right there. Nice. Let's have a look and see how this looks like. So what I will do here is just basically go run and then run add. You will see that I'm being prompted to enter some sort of text. In this case, I'll put my first name, and I can see that it's being assigned to result, and it's being shown back to the customer or the user in this case. Nice. Now, this is quite simple, and also notice how calling up the show method here is basically pausing execution and allowing the user to put an input before moving forward. Now, obviously, this is very boring, it just says input text, and you can change this very easily by changing text input default text here to basically say something like, please enter your first name. Awesome. If I were to run this again, I can see that I'm being prompted by this default text, which is basically, please enter your first name, which is a lot better. Now, obviously, you can also add multiple inputs here. So what I'll do here, first of all, is that I'm going to rename this text input to call it first name text input to start with. And then I will add another input. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I will change these ones to be last name text input in this case. That's fine. And then I'm going to change this result here to be first name. And then I will also change this to be last name. And then finally, I will change this here to be last name. So I have two inputs now. One of them is going to result in first name, and the other one is going to result in last name. And for the sake of simplicity right now, I am simply going to print both of these values right there in our terminal. All right, so if I were to save this and try this again, I will see I'm being asked for my first name, which is Mahmoud, last name, which is Musa, and I get these two values printed. Again, notice how easy it is to kind of accept value from the customer, and also notice how easy it is to kind of like pause execution until that happens. Right, so now you know how to set up inputs from the user, get the value, and kind of like have this slight conversation with the user. Let's set up a database to store this information that we are getting from the user. To do this, I actually need a couple more modules from Go. So I will go and get a couple more modules, like I mentioned. One of them is going to be Gorm. Gorm is kind of like the standard ORM for Go. I have another video that I go through how to set up an SQL database and how to interact with Go. You can have a look at that if you want to know more details. I'm not going to go into so much details in this video to just make it a little bit more focused. But in all cases, I'm going to install Go here, and then I'm also going to install one more library, which is basically this adapter for SQLite, and I installed this Libarius adapter, which is better than the standard one because it doesn't use CGO. Again, these are more details that you can check it out in my other video. So I'm going to install both these modules, and now I'm good to go. All right, so let's clean up first name and last name, and then let's start by having an interaction with the database. Again, you can see this in my other video, so I'm going to be just doing this. And if you want more details, you can always reference the other video. What I'm going to do is basically kind of like open up a database connection. And the way to do that is by calling gorm.open right there. And then in this case, I'm going to open up an SQLite database. And then this is going to open/create a database for me. And there are some many connection configuration that you can pass to this method, which I'm going to ignore for now. Also, I'm going to hide those inputs that we had earlier just for the sake of simplicity. And then finally, I'm going to run auto migrate on this database just to show you. I will show you what that means in a second. If I were to run this code right now, what I will see here, okay, this is an error. Let's just fix that quickly. Happy days. If I were to run this code right now, I will see that I have basically added this test.db file at the root of my CLI, which is basically this command here. It kind of opened up an SQLite database, couldn't find it, so it created one for us. Very, very straightforward and very simple. Now, the way you kind of structure things in a database is basically using a struct. So let's do that. So I'm going to call a struct here called user. And this is going to be a struct, which is an extension of Gorm model, because that's going to be saved in the database. It's going to have a first name, which is a string, and a last name, which is also a string. So this is as simple as it gets right now. Nice. What I'll do now is basically just run this auto migrate command, which will basically migrate the user, kind of like migrate the struct user onto the database to create the structure in the database for me. After that is being done, I am able to kind of create things in a database. So let's do that. So I can run basically create right there. And then I'm going to pass the reference to a user here. And that user is going to get its values from these two values that we are getting from the actual consumer here. So I will pass first name here to be first name, and I will also pass last name here to be last name. Fantastic. And then finally, now that the creation has been successful, I'm just assuming it is, you can see that I'm kind of ignoring some of the errors that we have here just to make things a little bit shorter. But basically what I'm going to do is just show a success message to the customer. You can do this by using the info kind of like subset, so info logger from pterm. And then I'm going to print a line here that basically says saved info to database. Fantastic. Now let's run this command again. It's asking me for my first name, it's asking me for my last name, and then finally it says I have saved things in the database. Now, how do I know that things are saved in the database? If I were to run this very simple SQLite to get all the users, I will see that I have a user there called Mahmoud Musa, and that is working very, very well. Awesome. So now you know how to take input from the user. You also know how to handle that input and save it in a database. So far, so good. Our CLI is coming along nicely. Next step is to be able to show and display whatever values that we have in our database to the user in a nice table. Let's do that. First step is basically going to add a new command. And now this command, I'm going to call it list. Again, by this time, you already know what's happening, but we have this list.go file right there in our command module. Let's open up this file. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just basically fetch all the entities that I have in the database and just print them just to get this part done. To do that, I'm going to basically copy the part here where we open up the database, this line basically. I'm going to copy that line here. I will organize my imports, and that hopefully will import the correct ones. That's beautiful. And then what I'm going to do afterwards is just basically db.find, and that will find all the things in the database that I need to have. And it is going to be basically the type of users that I want to get. Now, in order to do this, I need to basically have an empty variable to store all these users that I'm going to get. And for this, I'm going to have a slice of users like such. Okay, this is actually just user such. And then what I will do is basically I'm going to database.model, which is going to be in this case, the model of user. And then I will find all these users and pass them on to the users variable right there. With that done, what I'm going to do, I'm going to basically print whatever values that we get from the users right there. Now let's run this just to see what happens when we do this. I'm going to run the list command here, and you will see here that I'm basically printing the slice of that database information inside there. Nice. So now we can actually fetch all the data from the database. Let's make it look a little bit better because this looks terrible, to be honest. All right, now to be able to kind of like display this data in a nicer way, we can also use pterm. Now I'm going to use some kind of like a data table from pterm. And to do this, I'm going to initialize a variable called table data. Table data in this case is going to be pterm dot table data, I believe. Yes, table data right away. And then this is going to be like an array of arrays, a slice of a slice. And then the first header is going to be basically the header where you can see the header for all the columns. And that in this case is going to be first name and also last name. Awesome. I will leave that as is for now. Now, what I will do is basically I am going to loop over the users and then add all of them into this table data right there. To do this, I'm going to say for a user, I think it's like index and then user in the range of users do this stuff. And then what I will do again is table data.append. Yes, beautiful. Thank you. What we are going to append here is basically just a slice. And in that slice, we have to, yes, basically just a string slice. And in the first one is going to be user dot first name and then user dot last name right there. Cool. And that will basically give me the data that I need to render on the table. Now, the way I render this data into the terminal is basically I can use the default table from default table. Yes, and then the default table, something called with box, because this is the look that I like. Again, you can find more details about this in the pterm GitHub page. And with has header. Yep, it does have header. With, I think, with data, and the data here is called table data. And then finally, I'm just going to render this. I'm just going to render this. And if I've done everything correctly, I should be able to see the values in a very nice little table. Okay, I need to clean up my imports. Let's do that again. And you can see here that I'm actually seeing this data in that table. If I were to go back and run add, and then let's just get another entry, Jack Ryan, for example, and then I go back to list, I will be able to see two inputs in the entries right there. That's it. That was a very brief introduction into how to make CLIs in Go. I hope you've enjoyed the video. You can always take a look at the blog post in the description below. There, you'll find more details about all these commands that I've run through the whole video, along with links to pterm, Cobra CLI to learn more. If you are interested in getting your hands on the code, you can also find the link there. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.